All right, so I have been told that you eat crayons and you color inside the lines. Is that true?
I try.
You try.
I attempt it.
Okay, so I have to ask, where did you get this slogan, if you will?
I own a drafting business.
Okay.
So I draw house plans, light industrial, commercial. It's like AutoCAD, but an architectural 3D program. So I can go into a full 3D kind of rendering. But most people ask me, what do you do? I eat crayons and try to color inside the lines because it's, every house, every project's different.
Well, I like to say because every time we sit down and come up with an idea for something, I not only think outside the box, like I live outside the box and then think outside the box.
Yeah, I learned that in my military career.
Mm-hmm.
I was one of the guys that people always came to help figure out a problem. I was master of none but jack of all trades.
Oh, yeah, I fall in that category.
And I still, everybody back in the probably late 80s, early 90s, I'm carbon dating myself here. Everybody was like, well, you got to think outside the box when that term came along, that kind of thing. And I always was like, it's a cube.
It's a cube.
It's a cube. It has a top and a bottom as well as four sides.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to tell people, don't look at it as you're in a box. You got to look from the outside in. You got to look at the top, the bottom. And that's how I always address situations. And
that's smart.
so I've got one of them brains that's very analytical at times,
yeah,
very technical at times, and then sometimes just very warped.
I like it.
So,
I like it. JD, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
I'm excited you're here. Okay, let's start at the very beginning. Where were you born?
Salina, Kansas.
Salina, Kansas.
Yes.
I have been to Salina, Kansas.
Yeah, it's we drove through there a couple of years ago on vacation, and I was like, I don't remember where we lived. I was like 11 months when we left. My dad sold drugs.
Okay.
Pharmaceutical company.
That's good. It's a good kind.
Legal ones.
Yeah, okay.
But we were there for, I think, 11 months, and then they moved to Omaha, Nebraska for a year and a half or two. It's kind of shady. I don't remember that. I was like little. And then went to Evansville, Indiana for like 2 years. I remember parts of it as a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved to Plano, and I turned 5 and started kindergarten in Plano.
Okay.
And we lived there until I moved up to Paris in 8th grade. We had land out in Chakotah by the lake for 4 or 5 years. Summer weekend home. Moved up here in 8th grade, and then I did 8th grade through senior year at North Lamar.
So 8th grade, you were probably old enough to remember what your first impression of Paris was. What would you say that was like?
Well, we'd been coming here for 4 or 5 years before that.
Okay.
So we started coming up here. I'm carbon dating myself again. I'm trying to think. 76, 77.
Okay.
Something like that. We bought land, and my first recollection or remembering anything of that was it was our summer. We had a summer place. We spent the whole summer on the lake.
So it was fun. Back
then, Pat Mays, you'd go out to the lake, and there were campers everywhere. There were people at the lake all the time. It was busy.
Mm-hmm.
We had a deck boat, and then we had a pontoon boat. So we had always going out fishing, water skiing. Spent a lot of time at the lake growing up in those years. And then we moved up here when I was in 8th grade. And then I remember 9th, 10th grade, I couldn't drive.
Mm-hmm.
I would hook the tractor up to the boat and haul the boat down to the lake and take the boat out on the lake.
That's...
Yeah, redneck. Red.
We might still see that today.
Yeah, hey.
Not too far out of the...
Yeah. Yeah, I lived where the volunteer fire department is in Chakotah, just north of that, so we would go straight across down to Park East. So I had a dirt bike, lived all around the lake as a kid.
That's awesome.
In those years. So.
Okay, so 8th grade, going through school, like what was your thing in school? Was it like I was a basketball player? What did you do?
Started so when I lived in Dallas, I played soccer all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The year we left, I could have played in those, it was like an invitation only team kind of thing. We moved up here, there wasn't crap for kids back then.
Mm-hmm.
So I got fat. I think in like 8th grade, I was like 5'6", or I know in my sophomore year, I was like 5'6", 185 pounds. I came back my junior year, 5'11 and a half, 155 pounds. Nobody knew me. And my hair got messed up at the barber, so I had a new hairstyle. Like, nobody was like, who's the new guy?
Who's the new guy?
Yeah. It worked for my game with the ladies at the time. But we moved up here. I couldn't do soccer. I started like in band, but I had to have ear surgery. So I couldn't play any instruments to do crap. And I was chubby kid until junior year. I started working out with a buddy of mine. Could have played football junior, senior year, but I didn't like one of the coaches. He hated me because of who my girlfriend was in high school. He just hated me.
Okay.
Yeah, he was weird. So I was like, so I just worked out with a buddy and ran with probably one or two of the idiots in school that I probably shouldn't have ran with, but we had fun.
That's awesome. Okay, so coming out of school, did you have a plan?
Yeah, I'd always thought I'd go to college.
Mm-hmm.
Knew I always wanted to be my own boss, have my own place, or do something. I knew I wanted to go into the business world. My dad was in sales. I'm pretty natural at that. I can talk to anybody, from being at the Harley dealership or Harley biker guys to somebody at the country club.
You're still like that?
Yeah, pretty versatile. And, you know, I've had an interesting career in life and been different places. So
Yeah.
Knew I wanted to go to college. My senior year in high school, I was doing like one of the VOTEC classes, so I'd go in at like 7:30 to 10:30. I was done. We owned a little country store out in Chakota, so that was where I worked on paper. I worked there, but I mean, kind of went when I needed to. But I started taking some classes at PJC my senior year in high school, and it was the same idiot sitting next to me that I saw at the lake at Sanders Cove or Hippie Point partying the weekend before, and I'm like, no way I'm going to make it through college. Like, it just, no. I'm not putting the time in. I just wasn't putting the effort into, like, History 1 or something. I was like, it was boring. I wasn't challenged.
Yeah.
And so I was mature enough to know I wasn't mature enough to go off to college. I knew if I went off to college, by the end of my first semester, I'd come home and my dad would beat my ass for wasting his money and failing out and partying. So I was old enough and mature enough to know that I wasn't going to make it. And I'd gotten a letter in the mail from like the Navy about the nuke program or something. And I used to always make fun of those dudes on recruiter day. And I knew the recruiter locally that was here because I saw him at parties and stuff. So I knew him personally. And I used to always joke with him and stuff like, yeah, no way I'm going to college. Well, got that nuke letter. I'm like, So I went and took the test for the nuke program, and I missed by 1 point. And they're like, all right, go home and study your calculus and trig and this. And I'm like, I had algebra 1 in high school. And they're like, wait, what? Like, you're 1 point away from passing the nuke entrance exam, and you haven't had calculus or trig? I'm like, I had algebra 1. Actually, I had pre-algebra 1, and then instead of pre-algebra 2, I took algebra 1 because you had to have 2 minimum math. So I just took pre-algebra, and then I did algebra. Easiest way out. And so I sat down with the recruiter, and he's like, you don't want to be nuke. This was back in the mid-'80s. If there's a problem, you're going to glow in the dark the rest of your life. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do that. And it was either on a submarine or you're on an aircraft carrier.
Okay.
I'm like, nah, it doesn't interest me. He goes, advanced electronics was a big thing at the time. So computers were just coming, Apple, all your old Apples and some of them old computers had just come out in mid-'80s, 84, 85, 86. That's when people were starting to get computers at home. So I got in the advanced electronics field and I went in the Navy as an electronics technician.
Okay.
So
where'd you do boot camp at?
San Diego.
San Diego. And how that was, what is it, 6 weeks?
8.
8 weeks. And what was your first posting? Is that what it's called?
So, yeah, in the Navy is a little different than the other branches. We have A school, which is your core school, that whatever your job field is. And when you talk to somebody in the Army or Marines, they're like, oh, I was a 53, 27, 95. And you're like, cool, you were some numbers, dude. The Navy, you're an ET, electronics technician, a hospital corpsman. We name our guys. We actually don't just use numbers.
Yeah.
But so I went through a basic electricity school.
That was after boot camp?
Right after boot camp.
Okay.
And then I went to Chicago for A school, for my core school, which was electronics technician school. And then from there, depending on how you do in class and your class ranking, you get to pick orders. Back in those days, you got to pick orders by class ranking. I had people that always liked me. I was smart enough to learn early, like if the boss likes me, I'm always going to have it a little easier. And I did what I needed to do. I was a C student. I mean, in high school, I was a C student. And first, in the Navy, I was a C student. I got a crypto pipeline. So you had to be able to have a top security clearance, stuff like that. So I got a crypto pipeline to work on cryptographic equipment. So they sent me to Vallejo, which is in the Bay Area out in Frisco. So boot camp San Diego, first school San Diego, Chicago core school, San Francisco area for C school. Well, I was there a couple months, got in trouble.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So, that was my first, can't be doing this. So I tried to get in front of it, tried to do damage control, started volunteering, doing stuff because I knew I was going to have to go see the old man, go see the captain. So I tried to get in front of it. Well, they forgot about me until the week I was transferring. And, you got to go through a checklist and check out with all the different departments before you leave. And they're like, Mars. What happened to when you went to captain's mast? I'm like,
that one thing.
And then they realized they didn't take me 7 months after 6 months after this incident. And 20 minutes later, I was in front of the old man. Yeah. So it was interesting. It was my first wake up call. But from when I had gotten there, when I first had, and then I had an alcohol, like underage drinking kind of thing. Go figure, young sailor. From a bar called the Horse and Cow, right? They tell you what kind of establishment that is. It was a submariner's bar, but high quality establishment. So I go to, after that incident, knowing that I'm gonna have to go see old man. Well, I better start getting my crap together. So every class I went to after that, I was either number 1 or number 2 in my class. I'm like, I better apply myself. I need to do some damage control.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I did, went and saw him. So my first tour at a real command was the USS Belknap, which was the 6th Fleet flagship in Italy. Like, wow, this is really? So back then there were 4 fleets in the Navy: Pacific, Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and the Mediterranean. So we had a 3-star admiral on a cruiser, which is not a big ship. And we were stationed right between Rome and Naples on the coast. So I could throw a rock from my balcony in my house and hit the water. I lived in a third story of a villa on the beach. The ship, because we had a 3-star admiral, it was basically just showing the flag, shaking hands, ambassador kind of stuff. So we would leave where I was at in Gaeta, Italy, and if we got underway for 3 weeks, we would hit 3 ports for 4 days each. So we'd go to Spain, France, somewhere else, back home. I'm getting paid to do this. And you'd work 1 day and have 3 days off if the weather was nice. Summer, spring, summer, when the weather's nice, beaches.
Yeah.
So 20 years old, 21 years old, I'm on the beach in Spain, France, topless beaches. I'm from Chakota, Texas. I'm in Europe on topless beaches with a margarita or a pina colada or something. I'm getting paid for this. This doesn't get any better than this. Pros and cons. Was never home more than, I think the longest I was ever home in that 3-year tour was 31 days. The longest I was ever straight. We were ever home port. Longest I was ever gone was 29 days. And then we did about 3 months in France in the shipyard. But we got to, come home on a couple trips. So I married my high school sweetheart about 2 years in the Navy.
Okay.
And she had come over after I'd been over there a couple months. So did that tour, was never planned on staying in, went in to get college money. That was the whole reason to sign up.
So how long were you in the Navy?
For total?
Total.
24 years.
24 years.
Yes. So the plan was go in for 6 years.
And get college.
Get a
educated.
Technical degree.
Yeah.
Grow up a little bit, get my college money, get out, get a bachelor's, and go work for somebody in the computer electronic field and get paid.
So that's almost, is that considered career Navy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So my tour's coming up, done. I'm getting out.
Yeah.
I'm like, nah, I'm done. I didn't sign up for it. I didn't make this a career. I always told them I was staying in. That's, you're stupid if you're like, I'm getting out, and then all of a sudden you get stuck, you got to stay in. If you got one guy that's staying in and one guy that's getting out, this guy's going to get the better ranking than this guy because you want him to promote. So I was always smart enough to I had some real good mentors early in my career. A couple of them beat my ass physically.
Would you say
some sense into it, but I had good mentors.
Would you say they're the ones that influenced you to stay longer?
Well, I mean, when I got to be their level, the guys that I liked, the guys that were solid performers, I always wanted those to stay. I always tried to figure out what I need to do as their manager, as their leader, to enhance their career and help them out. That was my job as their leader. So I had bosses like that were great mentors. I had a couple that sucked ass, I hated, but I wanted to beat up. But there was a couple that were very influential in my career, yeah. So, but I was getting out. I had to stay. I had less than a year. They won't transfer you with less than a year. They're like, you got to stay here. And back then, we're talking 91.
Okay.
There's no internet. How do you look for a job in Texas when you're in Italy? Write a letter. So I'm like, how am I going to interview? Well, when you got like so many weeks left, we'll send you back to process out. And I'm like, come again? This isn't working. And good boss at the time, hey, you're an E5 and you got your warfare pin, you qualify for instructor duty, and there just happens to be in the Navy, you have sea duty and shore duty. You're on a ship and you're on shore duty. Depending on your job field, depending on your rank, will dictate how many years. Certain job fields, 5 years at sea, 2 years on shore. You just rotate. Some is 3 and 3, some is 4 and 3. So a lot of factors go into it, but they're like, hey, there's a shore duty billet. You could go be an instructor in Pearl Harbor for 3 years. And I'm like, and we'll give you a $10,000 bonus if you re-enlist. I'm like, wait, what? So you're going to take me and send me to Hawaii from Italy. I get to be home every night. I'll have duty once a month instead of once every 4 days spending the night on. So I'm like, wait, what? I can do that.
I'll work with that.
So I re-enlisted. I dropped the last year I had. I ended up re-enlisting and getting a bonus for 3 of the 4, because I had a year left on contract. Drop it, re-enlist for 4, get paid for 3 of it. I'm like, well, that'll take me to 9 years. And I was looking at it like, well, 9 years. So I have 9 years of experience on a resume. I'll get my degree while I'm there.
Yep.
Went to Hawaii. Didn't get my degree, of course. Worked my butt off, but enjoyed it. I went from Italy to Hawaii. I come home on vacation. Everybody's like, I hate you. Like some dude from Shikoda. I lived in Italy. I lived in Hawaii now. I saw, the 3 years I was in Italy, I think I saw 20 countries in Europe. So pretty cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah. So I tried to get one of my buddies in high school to join the Navy with me because he smoked a lot of weed. I'm like, dude, you need to grow up and do something else. Like, join the Navy with me on the buddy system. He didn't want to. I'm in Istanbul, Turkey. The ship is anchored out in the harbor. And all of a sudden they're like, hey, Mars, you got a visitor on the quarterdeck. Quarterdeck's like the main place where people come on board the ship, the official come aboard place. What? I'm in Istanbul, Turkey. Anchored out in the harbor. Like,
I don't know nobody.
How do I have a visitor? Well, one of the carriers had pulled in, and they're anchored way out because they drag a lot more water. It was one of my buddies from here that I went to school with. He joined 2 years after me, knew I was over there, found out, came over to shit. So 2 boys from Paris, Texas was not a good night in Turkey for us, but we had fun. But it's just a small world like that, So, but yeah, I went to Hawaii, was going to get out from there. Economy wasn't great. I didn't have my degree. My wife at the time didn't have her degree. I'm like, all right, I'll do one more tour. You get your degree. Well, I'll get out. At that point, I'd had enough years. I'm like, I'll finish out in the reserves, but I'm going to go get my degree and get a real job. Okay. Re-enlisted to go build one of the new destroyers.
Okay.
It was being built in Maine, but it was going to get commissioned. It was named after a guy from Texas. So I'm like, well, I got to have that one. I got to take the one named after a guy from Texas. It's supposed to be home ported in Florida. So built in Maine, was going to end up in Florida, but the commissioning was down in South Texas. So I'm like, take that one. So I get there, not even a year into it, I fired my first wife. So got to a point where we weren't on the same, like where I wanted to go in life and her weren't necessarily. I have nothing bad to say, no regrets. I mean, she's a good girl. She's a good woman. Just wasn't the direction we wanted. We grew up from being 20, married to 28.
Because she was your high school sweetheart.
Yeah, high school sweetheart. I was in the Navy about not quite 2 years when we got married.
Okay.
So right before I turned 21, right before she turned 20. So got married, and we were married for about 8.5 years. No
Okay.
kids. And good woman, just kind of grew up wanting to go different directions. So
So did that change your direction of, because y'all had a plan, but did that change everything for you?
I still planned on getting out and doing so. I got done with that tour, was still planning on getting out, and that was probably one of the worst tours. Commissioning the ship was really cool. Building the ship, it was really cool. We commissioned down in Corpus area. Went on our commissioning cruise. We were in St. Thomas. We were getting up to leave to head back to Norfolk to start our trials to get ready for deployment. Hit a reef. I went on a night dive the night before on that reef too. So it's like, ooh, yeah, there's a reef over there, by the way. So hit a reef. When you wreck a ship, commanding officer's gone. There's a couple guys automatically get relieved of command. They're gone. So it wasn't the skipper's fault, but he was gone. So we got new leadership that sucked. So that tour became horrible just because bad leadership. And so I was definitely getting out. And my boss at the time was not having anything to do with it. She's like, no, I'm like, I'm an E6. I'm saying I can go live in my car. All the guys my pay grade, my level of seniority that I worked with, all of them had 2-3 kids. None of them have degrees. Most of us didn't have degrees back then. Enlisted guys. Officers all obviously have degrees. You have to have one to be an officer. So those guys are scared to get out. Like, how are they going to support their family? What are they going to do? I was like, I can live in my car. I don't care. And my boss was like, no. And they're like, what's it going to take? And I was like, I need something cool. And I always diversified. When I was in my first ship, I did communications, cryptographic equipment. When I went to Hawaii, I taught micro miniature electronic repair. So we taught under microscope. And so that's what I went to do. But I ended up taking over and teaching calibration, electronic calibration. And then the destroyer I built, I was the radar, GPS, tactical air navigation systems, surface radar systems, some of the computer systems. I ran those work centers and groups on the ship. So the big areas for me in the Navy was communications, radar, and test equipment was the big 3 fields, and you needed to know some of each to advance. And so every time I switched, just to get more stuff on to put a resume. I'm like, hey, I'll take every school you give me because it's going on a resume. I wanted to get out and go technical, go work for a computer company, one of the government contractors, something like that. And so I was like, hey, they need somebody to go to school. Go.
Sign me up.
Yeah. So they're like, what's it going to take to keep you in? And I'm like, I need something cool. Back then, robotics was just starting. We're talking mid-90s. Robotics was starting to get out there. And historically, the government and the military led the technology, computers, robotics, a lot of stuff was led. And then, coming into the 90s, then you start seeing the civilian market taking it. And, you could go buy, nowadays you can buy a computer off the shelf quicker than the military can make one and get it through. It's just technology's moved from who developed it to where it's at.
Right.
But I wanted to get into robotics or something cool. Well, I had a buddy that worked at SEAL Team 4, and he's like, SEAL Team 2 needs a communications tech. So I went over and walked around, talked to him, it wasn't an interview per se formally, but talked to them, and they're like, all right. So I ended up taking orders of SEAL Team 2 as the running the communications shop. My chief, me, and a couple guys working for me, and we took care of all the communications, some of the tactical electronics.
So what does that look like? I mean, I get what you're saying, but what does that look like physically?
The equipment?
No, like the job.
So I would go to, depending if it was winter or summer.
Okay.
Summer, we were in 6:30, 7 o'clock. So I don't know what we called them, our catch me shorts.
Okay.
But like shorts, t-shirt, tennis shoes, you worked out 2 hours, Monday through Friday. You came into work and worked out for 2 hours. That was your job.
That was your job.
Runs, swims, whatever, the whole command worked out Monday through Friday. So if you called me looking for me at 8 o'clock, they're like, he's PTing, call back at 9:30. So you worked out for 2 hours, took a shower, and then you went up to your office. And, then we changed into maybe cargo shorts and a t-shirt and high-tech boots. So I wore shorts and T-shirt every day to work for 3 years, and I got paid to work out 2 hours a day. I'm like, this is awesome. And then the platoons were SEAL platoons. Back in those days, it was a little different than it is now, but they were in a rotation always. So, at SEAL Team 2, I think we had 8 platoons.
Okay.
2 were deployed. 2 were going to be the next 2 ready to deploy behind them. Then there was the next 2. So you always had platoons kind of in a rotation.
Yep.
6-month rotation.
Okay.
So, you start here, 2 years later, you're done. So 6 months of schools, 6 months of some training, and then 6 months of workups, checking all the boxes, getting ready for deployment, doing all the different scenarios they have to do, and then the 6-month deployment. So I started getting like, hey, JD, you want to go? We're going here to do some cold weather training, or we're going here to do military urban terrain, where they're doing like going through sweeping a town. Mm-hmm. And they had of us come. I would go as the comm guy, either doing communications and running stuff, or I would go as what we called OP4, opposing force. So like I went to Puerto Rico with them, and we were doing ship takedown. So I got on, there was a big Navy oiler. So I went out on the oiler, however many of us that were doing OP4, and the training department guys would go out on the ship, and then they would helo and fast rope the guys in that afternoon. They'd have to come find us on the ship and get whatever whatever the cargo was we had, and leave, whatever that mission profile was for their training scenario. And, I did that. So that was and we had, MP5s with simulate wax rounds. It's like paintball rounds on steroids. They're real bullets or real shells, but with a wax round. So if you're close enough, it'll break the skin. It'll hurt. Yeah. It makes a paintball look like cotton balls. I got shot in the back of the head. One guy walked by, security round, popped right in the back of the head. They're not supposed to do that, but he knew it was me. And you could have stuck a cigarette butt where the hole was. I bled good on that. And I'm just like, you suck. But he bought me beers that night, so it made up for it. But so I did 3 years of that. Loved it. It was good. And in that community, when you get in that community, reputation precedes you. Mm-hmm. And that's probably where I grew up the most as an individual or as a man, is I worked with guys that quit is not an option. Failures, not necessarily failures, but just quitting's not an option, not giving it 100%, stuff like that. It's not an option. No is like, no, I can't do that. It's not a acceptable answer. No, you need to figure out how you're going to do it. Now you got to get creative. So I worked there, and I had a pretty good reputation, and I didn't even get a call. Usually you'd call the guy that gives you your orders and say, mm-hmm. Hey, what's available? Because every month people are transferring all across the military. On the ship, you have to overlap, 2-year, 3-year tour on a ship. You'd have to overlap your people. So this guy would be here for a year. This guy'd come in, this guy. So every year you get a new guy. So you have overlap. Mm-hmm. Continuity across. You don't want everybody coming and going at the same time, or you'd have a horrible turnover and stuff would get dropped in the cracks, stuff like that. So when you called for orders, it was just timing a lot of times, like calling at the right time and stuff available. I was, my executive officer at SEAL Team 2 is like, hey, I got your orders. I'm like, no, I haven't called and talked to him yet. He goes, no, I got your orders. I'm like, oh shit. So back when they graduated guys from BUDS, which is like what you see on TV, mm-hmm. Basically I used to tell people, like, what's that like? Because I saw it firsthand. Imagine getting kicked in the jimmy 100 times a day. You just don't know when and how many times in a row they're going to kick you, but they're going to kick you 100 times a day in the jimmy for 7 months. So, hey, I'm going to give you 3 right now. And then as you're walking out, hey, wait, let me give you 5 more real quick. And then they might wait 3 hours, and then they kick you 10 times. But you're going to get 100 total a day for 7 months. I mean, that's what it was like for those guys. When I watched it, it was just physically abusive. Mentally is what I always reflected. I always thought it was more mental.
Yeah.
By the time they get the BUDS, most of them are all physically fit. It's the mental that is where it breaks guys. So, but back then, guys graduated from BUDS, and then they went to their East Coast or their West Coast team, mm-hmm. and then they went through a training cell on each coast, had their own training department, and they'd go through training, and then they'd get into a platoon, and once their platoon chief thought they were ready, they could take their boards And if they passed their boards, they got their trident, and they were now SEALs. Well, some guys got caught in the mix of they get to a team and they just formed up platoons a month before, so now it's going to be 5 months for the next platoons. Well, now it comes up and some guys just transferred in that are senior, they're going to get that spot. So now they got to wait enough. So there were some guys that ended up waiting way too long to get their tridents and just missed out on some career time. So what they did was they made a new department at the Warfare Center in Coronado that was after they graduate buds, they go through SEAL qual training. And the other thing is East Coast and West Coast weren't necessarily teaching the same thing identical.
Gotcha.
So they wanted to streamline and standardize. So they stood up a new department. So when guys graduate buds, they go through SEAL qual training. And that's where they get their technical tactical. When they graduate that, they get their trident and they go to the team as a SEAL. So I got transferred out there because when they started it, their radios were like, it'd be like you having a Victrola here instead of a microphone. I mean, it was old school technology. And they're like, hey, so they had a SEAL and they took and changed his into just a regular instructor billet so they could get me there. And so I took a SEAL spot as the communications guy and taught communications for 3.5 years.
That's cool.
It was a lot of work. Our classes were like 20 weeks long. We taught 5 a year. Do that math. In a 50-week calendar. So we overlapped.
Had to.
All year. And, I'd be gone for a week in the mountains up north of L.A., up in the campground doing map and compass and communications practical, and we'd be back a week, then up with the other half of the class, and then back, and then out in the desert for a week, and then I'd be back for a couple days, and then back for another week, and then back, and then start again. And we just did that year round. So it was a busy schedule, but I've been, like, some of the guys I've known in my career are just pipe hitters. Like, a couple of them have passed now. The guy that shot Osama bin Laden, I've had several Irish car bombs at Chicks Beach Cafe with him. I was stationed with him at SEAL Team 2. Jocko Willink. The guy is a beast. He was an intimidating dude 20-something years ago. He still is. He's a big podcast, has a show, is on Fox TV.
That's awesome.
4 of the 5 guys that died in Operation Red Wings with Marcus Luttrell, the lone survivor story. Like, I put 4 of those 5 through training. 1 was a good buddy of mine. It's a real small community. Ty Woods was the SEAL that died with Chris Stevens, the ambassador in Benghazi, the 13 hours of Benghazi. Mm-hmm. So I've met some really interesting dudes, some guys that made big impressions on my life, and changed me probably who I am. Quit's not an option. Failure's it's not an option. I mean, you're going to fail at times. It's do you get back up and keep going or not?
That's what I was going to say. It feels like this time frame of your life really molded a lot of who you are.
I spent about 9 years with them, a little over 9 years. I could have gone. So I left Buds and I went to do a special project. So they sent me to Hawaii to get me out there. And then I was supposed to be out of the country for 18 months on a special project for the Admiral at Warcom, which is the SEAL Admiral. And I got out there, and there was one of the leadership guys, and I was a chief by then. He and I didn't get along. He was a regular Navy fleet officer, like a ship guy. And he couldn't comprehend how spec ops worked. And I was like, I can help you with that. I can help you walk out of here like you're a rock star, boss. And he was going to be my boss to some extent. Or you can just leave as, like, you completed your tour. There's 2 ways. You can leave like a rock star, or he did his job. Mm-hmm. I can help you with either one of them. And at that point, I had 19, 20 years, I think, 21 years. And I had 19 years at that point. So I could retire after that. So I'm like, I don't care how this turns out.
Yeah.
I can walk out the door in 2 years. It was a 2-year gig. And he and I didn't get along. While I was working out of the SEAL delivery vehicle team, which is the wet submersible mini subs. So I was stationed, that's where I was at, working out of to go out to do the special project. And they were short electronics guys. And I didn't like the guy I was going to be working for. Let's do a drug deal. So I called up the executive officer on the platform and was like, hey, you don't want me to come out there because you're pissing me off. And if I come, you're going to have the most pissed off, hateful Navy chief you've ever seen in your life. I'm going to make your life miserable, sir.
Sir?
He's and I knew him, and I had a great relationship. I said, you're screwing me on my career advancement, and you're screwing me on some other stuff. I know the CO doesn't like me, so why don't you just cut ties with me and let me go now, and you can find somebody else to take my spot. And he's like, well, I'd have to talk to your executive officer there where you're at. And I'm like, oh, well, you're on speaker right now. And he's like, I hate you, JD. Like, thanks. And the executive officer out there is like, yeah, we'll take you. And I'd already worked out what I was going to do. They wanted me to take over be the repair chief, so I'd have been in charge of the garage shop with all the mini subs. I had like 8 or 10 of them. I didn't go to Hawaii to sit behind a desk. There was a platoon that needed an electronics guy. They do not let chiefs go into platoons and deploy. They keep E6 and below. I'm like, you short on ETs? They're like, yeah. I'm like, well, then you'll let a chief go. And they're like, no. I'm like, they have 2 electronics and a hull technician. That's the guy that helps with the mechanicals and the structural of the mini sub. I'm like, well, just give me 2 HTs and I'll be the ET. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I'm a chief. I can fix that shit. I got this. I'm like, okay. So they gave me a really good first class and a piece of shit E4 because they knew we could fix him. But he wasn't a piece of shit, but he needed direction in life, put it that way. So I jumped in. Our platoon was supposed to go to Singapore, Thailand. We're supposed to work with the Australian Special Forces joint for like 6 weeks. It was just the most dream Westpac deployment. It was going to be my last run to go do anything. And then I knew I'd be going to like a desk job to finish out my career. Got in the platoon, started doing all our workups and training. Then they restructured how the wet submersible mini subs deploy. We became a national task mission, which means the Pentagon and the White House had to basically sign off on what we were doing, kind of thing.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we were a national task, which means we just sit in Hawaii and wait for the pager to go off and then go do something. I'm like, oh my God, this sucks.
Hurry up and wait.
Yeah, but we had fun. So we did what we were supposed to do that was under our mission task profile for our deployment cycle. And then it was like, we got like 5 months left. What are we going to do? So we started sending guys downrange to augment some of the other SEAL teams in Afghanistan, Iraq. I wasn't going to get a go because I was just a comm guy. So half the SEALs went. I kept the other half back. I was managing them. And then my best friend, who was the platoon chief SEAL, got over there, and the guy running the Tactical Operations Center was an instructor with me in San Diego. And he's like, why isn't JD here? I don't need that dude. They took our officer in charge, which was a junior officer. He's like, I don't need him. I need snipers. I need comm guys. I need corpsmen. Send him home and get JD. You know, he's like, if you don't get JD over here, you're going home. You know? And they called and like, pack your bags. Like a week and a half before I blew my knee playing soccer on the command soccer team. 39 years old, 225 pounds, probably not the right time to start playing soccer again in life.
I was fixing to ask if you'd been playing soccer the whole time.
No, I hadn't played since I was in Italy, and that was just we played in Italy, and I played some on my first ship.
Yeah.
But it was more, we'd pull into port, and they would always be somebody challenged the Navy guys to soccer. We were in Yugoslavia, and we got challenged to soccer. It was a semi-pro indoor team. 3 of the guys were like alternates on their Olympic team. Like it was like 43-1 or something. It was just stupid. But they'd always throw a party afterwards and feed us, and we'd have fun. So it was just for fun. But yeah, I hadn't played soccer in years. I played soccer as a kid. I'll be goalie. Yeah, I was 6 foot. I was weighing about 225. I was pretty big upper body because I was working out every day. Blew my knee.
So did that ruin your chances to go?
So they called me. No, I tried. I was trying to go. And I came home on leave in 2005. I was home here visiting. I think I was going to a family reunion thing or something. And I went out to Crosswires one night with a buddy of mine. Walking through, comment I told you earlier, heard a comment, and I'm like, oh, I got this. Met my now wife. We dated the 2 years I was in Hawaii. So when I was thinking I was trying to go downrange, because that was the last chance I'd trained, I think we had 12 SEALs in my platoon. I think 8 of them I put through training. Yeah, 8 of them I put through training as an instructor. Last chance I'm going to get to go deploy. I'm wanting to go. And, I'm telling the wife, like, oh, I'm a communications guy. I'll be with the computers, with the coffee cup in the tent, with the admirals in general. I won't be doing nothing. So I blew my meniscus. I had an ACL tear, and I just trashed my cartilage. And MRI and everything's already done, and they're trying to schedule my surgery, and I go back over like hey doc, can you sign this? And he's like, what's this? I'm like, I got a trip I got to make, whatever. And he's like,
It's not a big deal.
Wait, what? Iraq? You're not going? I'm like, oh yeah, no, I need to go. And he's like, are you gonna be wearing body armor? I'm like, not unless I'm getting shot at. And he's like, all serious, no sense of humor. And I'm like, oh shit. Now I'm joking. He's like, are you gonna be running? I'm like, not. I'm like, no, I'll be in a tent with a coffee cup. And that's what I was telling my wife the whole time. He wouldn't sign off. They had already talked to the hospital. They were, scheduling for my knee. They didn't know if they're going to have to do the full ACL or what. They wouldn't know until they got in there. I'm like, great. I'll wake up with a full cast or I'll wake up with the sleeve knowing they either replaced it or they didn't. So
Dang.
I'm like, couldn't go, which turns out to be pretty good because my best friend came back with like 29 shrapnel holes from grenades on a rooftop. And first thing he tells my wife is like, oh, it's a good thing JD wouldn't go. He'd have been right next to me. And I'm like, shut up, dude. And then he's like, oh, and if he'd have been over there, he'd have been driving that Humvee that hit that IED. And I'm like, shut up. Like, that's not what you tell me. My wife's not letting me go to Hobby Lobby with you, dude. Ever. Like, so, I mean, it's, so my wife's pretty happy I didn't go. I mean, I have no regrets in life, but that was one of the things that, I trained and worked with SEALs for 9 years. And I've, lost buddies over there. And that was one thing that I didn't get to go, and I wish I could have.
Yeah.
Worked out, I guess, physically that I've got injuries from my career, but worked out that probably I didn't need any shrapnel. He's got that little card when he goes through the X-ray detector at the airport, like, oh yeah, I've got shrapnel. They got shrapnel they couldn't take out.
Oh man.
So, and he's like, yeah, JD would have been right next to me. Oh, great. So, down, the one thing I wish I could have gotten downrange, but I didn't get to deploy to Iraq or Afghanistan. So it's just part of it.
So that was your that was the end.
Finished out there, and then I could have gone back to San Diego and worked for the Admiral as his tactical operations chief for a tactical operations center. Mm-hmm. But my wife and I were getting married. My oldest daughter, she's my stepdaughter. You wouldn't know it. She was 3 when my wife and I met, 5 when we got married. I knew if I went back to San Diego, the school sucked there, and I was going to be on a pager, and I was going to be gone quite a bit. And I didn't want to take her out there, drop her off, and then hit the road, be in Africa, be back, be in Europe, be back, be wherever. So I had the choice of going back to San Diego, staying in Spec Ops, or there was a billet open at a Joint Training Command for a department head in Biloxi, Mississippi on an Air Force base. Anybody in the military knows the Air Force has the nicest bases. Their bases are nice, their housing's nice, their commissary exchange, all their facilities are top notch. Mm-hmm. And in the orders it said they were going to pay for my books and tuition 100%. I'm like, okay, that's why I joined.
Yeah, it's always been your.
So I went down and talked to them before I accepted orders to see if that's where I wanted to go. And I'm like, okay, I know what I'm going to be doing when I get here. So I accepted orders that. So my wife and I came back. We got married July 7th, 2007. So coming up on 15 years. Went down to Biloxi. And it's the first time in 21 years of my career I could get in a car and drive back to Paris, Texas. I was either Virginia area, Maine, San Diego, or Coronado, San Diego area, Bay Area, Hawaii, Europe.
Yeah.
$1,000, $1,500 plane trip or 20 plus hours of driving. So I'm like, I can get in my car and be home in 9 hours. 8.5 by myself, 12 with wife and kids and dogs. But, so I'm like, yeah, we'll go to Biloxi. So I went to Biloxi, and I got there, and when I got there, they'd changed what I was going to be doing job-wise. So now I took over as I own all the kids, all the students, and I'm the cop for the Navy on the Air Force Base. Probably the wrong guy to give that to. So Navy's uniform's different than the Air Force. Officers and chiefs in the Navy wear khakis, and then they gave me a gold badge. So I walked around and just tormented Air Force people. I had horrible leadership there. My first couple leaders I had were pretty good, but we had a big turnover on leadership, and they just sucked. So that was a hard part of that. But so I finished out there in 2010, and I retired in 2010 with 24 years. Was looking at a job at Stennis Space Center, kind of in the same community, working with spec ops and stuff. The job position required a bachelor's. Oh shit! but nobody had applied that had the qualifications. They wanted somebody with spec ops background, they wanted an electronics guy, and they needed somebody with the highest top secret you could get. I've got all three. Just don't have the bachelor's. So I'm like, I'll sign a piece of paper saying that I'll get it within 3 years.
Yeah.
Or you can fire me. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah. And I knew guys on the project because there's a small boat unit down there and a spec ops unit down at Stennis Space Center. So I was going to go over, and it was a really good GS job, well-paying job. So they were getting ready. It was about a week left on that position to run out, because the government has to post stuff for so long, and then when it expires, they can rewrite it and repost it. They were rewriting to repost it in a week, and somebody applied that was an electronics guy with a clearance, and that was it. So they had to hire him. So we decided we'll move back to Paris. My wife had a house here.
Okay.
In-laws lived next door. My parents were here. And I'm like, we'll come back to Paris. My grandparents lived in Iowa growing up. So I see them summers and Christmas. I'm like, let's go back. The girls will get time with their grandparents. I think it's important. We'll have help when we need it. I'll go back to college. Listed the house on the market. Next month, the housing bubble pops and the oil spill hits. And we were 2 blocks from the water in Ocean Springs. Like, you could smell the oil in there. So that was fun. That was the other reason. The economy was kind of sucking at the time. So decided, all right, we'll come back to Paris. My wife does hair. She was at Tangles before we had left. I'm like, we'll go back. You go back doing hair. She missed it. She did some there part-time, but, she was ready to go back to work. We had a little one. Our daughter was born she just turned 13 this last week. So she was born down there. So she wanted to go back to work. I'm like, I'll go back to college full-time. I'll get a housing allowance. I'll get paid. I'll use my GI Bill. So we moved back in the fall of 10, and I went to PJC, started taking classes, and then I finished my bachelor's in 2 years. Highly not recommending that, especially with daughters, like preschool and elementary age daughters, It was painful, but I finished and got the Bachelor's Arts Applied Science, which is business degree from Commerce. So I started in the fall of 10, and I graduated in December of 12. So very painful.
But good job on you.
In college they called me the non-traditional student, which meant the old guy sitting in the back. I think I was 42, 43. So luckily every class but one of my last classes, the instructor was older than me, but I did have one class that the professor was younger than me, and I gave him crap the whole time. I had 24 years in the military. I worked in unconventional warfare for 9 years. I mean, I excelled in that.
Yeah.
So, English professor, hey, here's a paper you need to turn in 2 weeks. Okay. By the end of the first week, I'm walking in going, hey, is this what you want? Is this what you're looking for?
Right.
Because that's how it was in the military. If your boss is like, here's a policy or a program, we need you to change it. I need it in 3 weeks. By the end of the first week, if you're not going in, seeing if that's the direction they want, you're not doing your job, because it has to be done in 3 weeks.
Right.
That means all the other crap in between now and then has to get done. So go through the chop chain, make changes, make corrections, make edits multiple times. That happens. So that's how I addressed my college was I'm going to hit it head on. I get up in the morning, take the girls to school. I go sit in the library until class started, go to class, in between classes, study, whatever, do my homework, get out of class, study until it's time to pick the girls up from school, get them home, dinner, whatever, and then I'd sit down at 8 o'clock at night, 8:30, and 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Get up at 6 o'clock the next morning. And I did that for 2 years. I took a 16-hour summer, which I had to get a waiver for because they won't let you take more than 8 hours, and I took 16 hours. And I'm just like, look at my GPA. Who's going to be hurt here if I fail?
Yeah.
And they're like, okay. So would not recommend that, because that was all day, every day for like 5 weeks or whatever. 5 days a week, like 10 hours a day of 8 hours a day of class kind of crap. But
brutal.
Yeah, it was rough. But and I wasn't like, I wouldn't have walked at PJC or even at Commerce, but I started I just wanted to get a business degree. I wanted to have my own business. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do yet. My best friend that was the SEAL platoon chief went to work for Microsoft as a senior account exec. He got his degree at his next tour after our platoon. And then he got into Fuqua, which is Duke's college business, equivalent to McCombs down at UT.
Okay.
He got into Fuqua, which is a top 5 executive MBA program. And then he got picked up by Microsoft, and he was making like $325 starting. Yeah, 400 first year. And I'm like, he's like, get into it. If soon as you get accepted into an EMBA program, I can hire you. He goes, I can start you at 225. You'll make 300 your first year. I'm like,
Yes,
all right,
please.
so which school do I need to look at? So I started looking at college. And that was while I was at PJC getting all my stuff done before I transferred over to commerce. So now I start thinking, okay, which classes, what do I need to do? I've got a military career. I've got a resume for that. I don't have a college credentials.
Mm-hmm.
I need a college resume if I want to get into one of the big boy schools. Because if I'm going to go to executive MBA school, I want to go to a top 5. I want Stanford, Kellogg, Wharton, Harvard, Fuqua, one of the big that's consistently ranked top 5 programs. So I started talking to them, threw Stanford right out the window off the bat because they're just crazy out there. They're nuts.
Mm-hmm.
I got put on a top 50 MBA candidate list. So I went to a thing in Dallas, talked to the Harvard admissions, talked to a bunch of different people, figured out Harvard it was $160,000 for a 2-year program. I'm like, and I was going to be gone for 2 years. Couldn't afford that as a retired Navy chief with no other income, and be gone for 2 years. And it was Harvard, and they're way more liberal than I probably would have been like the water boy knocking Colonel Sanders out in the classroom at Harvard. That would have been me, kind of thing. So I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and that's when I decided, like, I'm not going corporate. I talked to my buddy. He had accounts in Texas, and I'd meet him somewhere, spend the night, and he would tell me what corporate life was like at Microsoft, or he was at Oracle for a while, and I'm like, I'm going to choke somebody out. Like, if you call me a liar or throw me under the bus to save your ass, we're going to have words.
Right.
I'm a pretty straightforward. I'll own my crap. If I mess up, I'll own it. And I learned that reputation. That's part of your reputation, taking your lumps when you have to take them, and then fixing it and moving on. But I figured out I was not going to make it in the corporate world with the politics, like seeing what he had to deal with.
Yeah, I wouldn't probably fit in that world either.
No. I mean, I'm the guy that, like, if you throw me under the bus or call me a liar or try to save your ass, and it happened to him, and that's how I know, is he told me, he told a guy at work, he goes, I'll kill you and I'll never find your body. He was at HR the next morning. And I'm like, and they're looking at his file going, he was a 22-year Navy SEAL. Like, he could do it. I'm like, how do you get around that?
Yeah.
Like, I would have reached over, grabbed his tie, and bounced his head off the table. Like, okay, now you want to tell the truth, or do I need to come around there and finish that? Would have been my personality. I mean, I'd beat his ass. You start messing with a $400,000 or $500,000 a year salary because you're lying to cover your own ass. Yeah, no, somebody's gonna get hurt. And that's how Brian was then. That was my buddy. And I saw what he had to deal with and some of the stress. And he made it up to, big money starting salary. And the stress and the hours they want. They want 100 he had a boss basically like, I'm not paying you to sleep. I don't care if you sleep. You're getting paid 7 digits a year salary. Sleep wasn't part of your job description. I don't need that. There's better things in life.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I did really well in college. I got all A's, and it wasn't because I'm any smarter than anybody else. My friends that know me, the people in the cigar club, they call me dumbass, right? I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I know where my abilities are, but I held myself accountable. I did what the teachers asked, and I did it when it was supposed to be done, and I got all A's, and it wasn't hard to me.
Right.
So I graduated 1 of 4 from, summa cum laude, which, and I look back now, I'm like, but it was commerce. People were like, well, it was commerce. There were a couple of them classes were pretty damn hard, I can promise you that.
Yeah.
Some of the business operations management and statistics and crap, they get a little hairy. Mm-hmm. But I did well in school. So on paper, I look smarter than I am. That's what I tell most people. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I started looking. I saw something pop up on franchises. So I started like, maybe I'll start, franchise. And everywhere I was stationed in the military, like go to a restaurant, go to a bar, go somewhere, I'm like, this place would do cool, and this would work in Paris, Texas. And I'd be in another place and be like, yeah, this wouldn't work in Paris. Like it just, the tofu soup place is not working maybe in Paris, Texas.
Yeah.
Steakhouse maybe, not the tofu place. So I kind of looked at, what I want to do, and I started looking. Then I got on the veteran franchise page, and I started comparing like the top 100 franchises, top 50 franchises, vet friendly, which is the Vet Friend Association. I started looking, and drug and alcohol testing kept popping up in the top 10 across the board of up and coming businesses. So I started looking at that, but the cost to buy a franchise, like $90,000 for one of the companies. I'm like, in Paris? Like, that's going to take me like 12 years to pay off doing drug tests. You'd think I'd be real busy in Paris, but so I started one from the ground up and did drug testing for a couple years.
Awesome.
And during that process, I drew the house plans for my dad's house. Took them to a drafter that was old school, pencil and ruler. Drew them, got the bill, and was like, how much? Like I did half the work. During the build process, I was asking the contractors, like, hey, is there, I had an electronics background. Is there a market for solar? And this would have been 2014 probably.
Okay.
Somewhere in there. Is there a market for solar? No. Not enough to eat. Is there a market for audio, visual, home security, sound wiring? Because back in, 6, 8, 10 years ago, people were still doing theater rooms in their houses. That was a big thing for a while.
Yep.
That's kind of gone away with, coming out with the little, what's the stick? Fire stick. And now everything's streamed. So you don't have to have a theater room to put a DVD in to watch a movie with your people. You just pull it up on your iPad and throw it to your smart screen.
Yep.
So you don't see those as much anymore. But I did house plans, and one of the contractors was like, why aren't you drawing? So I did my research, and the two guys that were mainly doing most of the drafting were late 60s, early 70s.
In Paris?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, there's a market here. There's a gap. Nobody else, who else is doing it? I don't have a construction background, which, I've told a bunch of kids. I interviewed a kid the other day, and I'm like, you need to have some construction knowledge to be able to do this job. Like if you want to sit in my chair eventually, you got to have some construction knowledge. I don't have that.
But it would have helped if you did.
I bullshit really well. I've done enough projects. I've been on, I've done Habitat for Humanity stuff. We've done stuff in the military. We did a lot of community service projects. We built our house in Chakotah when I was a kid from probably 5th to 8th grade. I watched it and we built stuff. So I've got enough knowledge, but I had a technical job in the military. So blueprints, schematics, drawings, that's natural to me.
Yeah.
So that side of it was easy. The hard part for me was just some of the terminology and verbiage and how certain things are done in a house. And, I made my mistakes, but I figured them out and got educated by contractors, and now I don't make those mistakes. Try not to.
So that was business number 2 for you?
So I did drug and alcohol for a couple of years, and when that come up on drafting and I started looking at it, I'm like, all right, I'm going to go learn AutoCAD, because that's what, everybody draws with AutoCAD. So I started taking classes at PJC in the drafting program. They got a great program. And in there, Revit, which is the software I use, is architectural 3D. It's in the CAD family. But it's like, here's your drawing. Let me click a button. Here's your house. Let me take the roof off and show you the inside.
Yeah.
And that's when the light bulb went off in my house. Like, man, if I had a TV and could show people what their house looked like before it got built, that's what I'm going to do. And that's where Paris Drafting started from. And that was in, I think, 2015. I first started doing houses. So it's grown to, I'm doing good now. I mean, I'm steady. I've got majority of my business is contractors bringing me clients, the guys that are building the houses. So, and that's where we get to trying to color inside the line and not eat all the crayons. And because all my buddies there are asking me like, you just eat crayons. I'm like, yeah, that was the Marines really, but it's one of them things that no house is the same. Sometimes there's some redundancy, but it's like in when you're doing a podcast, every person that sits there is going to be a little different.
A little bit different, that's for sure.
People are individuals. Every house, I had eight people in a 2-month period walk in with the same floor plan. 3 of them didn't even see the floor plan. They just had a picture of the house. They went, I want this house. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm drawing that one right now for so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so. Most of the time, the women are like, wait, what? No, we can't do that then. Like, hang on. Yeah, they don't want it to look like somebody else's, right? But all 8 of them look different. Every one of them looks different. Same basic floor plan, but, hey, we took a room off because they didn't need 4 bedrooms.
Yeah.
We flipped it. We changed, that was a brick house in the picture. Now it's siding and stone or it's stone and brick, or it's a mixture of textures and colors. And we flip them. So they all look different, but it was the same basic format. So I've done some really cool houses and some really cool projects.
That's awesome.
That, can't complain. Had to sign a non-disclosure agreement on a house I did in Dallas for a billionaire. Yeah.
Wow.
One of my clients was doing work for an architect or a interior designer and referred me because they needed plans on a house before they could go in and make changes to it. I walk in this guy's house. It's 23 feet to the ceiling. On paper, when I was done, it was just shy of 13,000 square feet. Same neighborhood the Bushes live in. And
big
Dallas.
House.
Yes. Large house. I had to laser the whole thing and then draw it and then figure out how they wanted to do their changes for the. And then that interior designer became like one of the top 5 international. Like he just got awarded one of the top 5 international designers, like number 1 in the country or something. Like that's a good dude to know.
That is a good dude to know.
So that's kind of like what's gotten me to where I'm at.
Now you've recently joined with Rigby's, right?
I started a cigar club about 4.5 years ago in Paris. Okay. Some Navy buddies came through town. We had cigars. Everybody in the military smokes or dips. I'd quit. But some buddies came in, got a cigar. Now I'm like, I want to get into cigars. I started a cigar club, and there was 6 of us the first night, eight the next month, something like that. 2.5 years into it, I get a message one day from Gary Flynn, like, hey, we're going to open a cigar whiskey bar in Paris. Would like to meet you. And I'm like, got my attention. Please. Got my attention.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, we're looking for an architect if you could recommend one. We just became best friends.
Yeah. Right?
Because I own Paris Drafting. So, yeah, I ended up doing the plans. That has been a brutal process between the city building official we had for a while. Historical was a hurdle after speed bump after hurdle mess. We'll leave it at that.
But y'all are close. I mean, y'all are like light at the end of the tunnel. You're almost there.
But I've been doing monthly cigar clubs for 4.5 years. We're averaging 40-something people show up. We had people showing up at Rigby's with bringing their cooler and a lawn chair, and we'd have 45 people for a smoke.
That's awesome.
They're not open yet. So, yeah, they're actually best friends. My wife and Leslie just immediately clicked.
That's good.
Yeah. So we're best friends with them. We do stuff with them all the time. So that's one of the coolest. That's one of that's the longest project I've worked on. I've been working on it for like 2.5 years.
Man.
Probably one of the longest. But it's been a lot of fun. I mean, it's a 100-year-old building, so there's a lot of changes, a lot of things during the process.
Yeah. We probably could do a whole podcast just on the process of a downtown building. I would
probably burn some bridges with historical in the city if I really told you what I thought.
Let's not do that.
Yeah, there were some hurdles and roadblocks but I will say the city's gotten a lot better. The new building official's great.
Yeah.
So I turned 30 jobs down in 6 months last year just in the city alone because I wouldn't take a project in the city because it was building official was that bad that we used to have. New guy's great.
Great.
So downtown obviously is growing.
Yes, and we want it to.
Yeah, we've done some projects, but yeah, Rigby's is that's probably one of the near and dear ones because I smoke cigars. My wife smokes cigars with me, so me and Gary and Leslie and we go have cigars. But it's been. I'm glad we came back to Paris. I never planned on coming back to Paris.
Awesome.
After the military, but great place to raise the kids.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Definitely glad you're here.
Yeah.
It seems like a good fit for Paris, for you and your family.
I've enjoyed it.
So you are one of these podcasts that there's so much in your story that it probably needs to be 3 podcasts.
We didn't even talk about doing stuff with Felsberg.
Right. And so I feel like I'm going to have to do a part 2 with you down the road.
Yeah,
and we'll have to pick up because I try to shoot for 45 minutes and we went over.
Oh, well, that's edited.
Which is fine.
Yeah,
which is I'll cut a bunch of your stories out.
Yeah, just cut some of the bullshit out.
But thank you so much for being on the podcast, and I actually do hope to have you on again probably soon, and we'll hit some Felsberg stuff because that's probably an interesting story.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah,
it was something different. I'll try anything once, twice if it doesn't kill me, 3 times if it's a 50-50.
Well,
so
I'm sure there are like hundreds of stories that we missed.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm glad y'all are killing it down here, and glad to be on and support y'all.
Thank you, and I'm glad you're going good. I'm glad you've got a lot going on in your world. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Hey, I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
All right, see you guys next week.